So to start off with, I'll give you just a little bit about our college. We're a community college in Illinois, 7th largest in terms of size, 11th largest in terms of head count, at least according to fall 16 census. We're one of 39 in Illinois. We have about 1,000 personnel, about half of that is faculty. So the National Student Clearinghouse model is what we're talking about today. Before we dive in too much into the model, I want to make sure everybody has an understanding of what National Student Clearinghouse is and what the Student Tracker Service is. So National Student Clearinghouse is a subscription service. There's about 3,600 colleges nationwide that subscribe to it. Most of us use the Enroll Verify and the Degree Verify for reporting. If you submit that information to them, then on your behalf they help format and submit your financial aid reports for you. So many colleges use it. As a result, the clearinghouse has tons of data about enrollment activities for these universities, as well as graduate activities for these universities. And so if you subscribe, a free service is Student Tracker. Student Tracker provides information about your students that you submit and ask for information on as far as their transfer activity at other institutions. So they give you back a detailed report with information about any enrollment activity at any of these other 3,600 universities and colleges, as well as graduate information on them. So to give you a little bit of background on our experience with Blackboard Intelligence, we implemented Blackboard Intelligence in about 2010 when it was iStrategy. So we've been longtime customers. We only implemented this student module. We quickly realized the need to integrate the transfer data with our data warehouse. And so we took a stab at it with some static tables in 2013, and we're writing SQL queries and joining against the data warehouse. And that worked okay. If you've ever worked with the reports that you get back from NSC, they're Excel files, they're unformatted, they're a little hard to work with. So beyond your basic things like what are the top transfer universities, if you want to get into a lot of detail with that, you need some really savvy Excel skills or access skills to do that. The person in the position, former to me, was tasked with, well, build a custom implementation, fact tables, dimensions, the whole 9 yards for NSC in our data warehouse. So she began that work. She created one fact table for all the NSC data, began in earnest in 2015. I took the position in 2016 and was tasked with finishing that work amongst many other tasks. So you can imagine how little progress we were able to make on it. We were able to do enough to be a big contributor to Blackboard, as about that time they started working on their own implementation of the NSC extension. So we were able to provide quite a bit of feedback, where we'd started, what our custom implementation had looked like so far to them as they began to develop theirs. So in August of 2017, they needed an environment, a real environment with real student data to test the new NSC extension. So they installed it on our test server using our student data. And so I was able to follow that process along and provide feedback to them on how it worked and what I was seeing. And then in October 2017, once we had it all working on the test server, it was now my turn to do the work. And so I was one of the first ones to go through their process of installing on the production server. So I got the first install manual and the first set of install files, and part of my job was to provide feedback to them on the process and how it went as I installed it. And so you ask, why didn't we just use our own customization? Why did we go to the effort of turning around and using the Blackboard extension? Well, because of the unformatted data, because as I mentioned earlier, I mentioned we had one fact table. Well, we were dumping all of the data from NSC under, and we'll talk a little more in detail about this, under the subsequent enrollment search option into one fact table. If you know anything about NSC data, this creates a real problem because now you have to build the logic to understand, did that student transfer in, transfer out, transfer back? So now you have a whole issue with the sequence of colleges, the sequence of enrollment activities, and you get this really complex logic you need to build out into your dimensions to make it work, to make it functional, to report on. I am more or less a shop of one at my institution. I do everything from manage the server, the ETL process, to all of the customization work, SQL writing for all of the state and federal reports, as well as the pyramid report creation and pyramid training for faculty. So it just wasn't getting done. It wasn't going to happen. And Blackboard saved the day for me. So the NSC extension is now ready and available. It's out there, as they mentioned earlier. You can install it yourself. There's an install guide. It supports both PeopleSoft and Banner. And I've already been through the process and the headache and found all the gotchas. So I'll tell you a little about some of those gotchas today. I won't be able to get into a lot of technical detail, but if you're interested in more of the technical detail and you have questions about the implementation, I'm happy to talk with any of the colleges about my experience. Just in talking with a few colleges already, I've learned quite a bit and went back and made a few improvements myself. So the NSC extension installation. So we'll just talk a little through the process and how it works, because you guys are all going to go back and do this now at your colleges, right? You'll be excited to after we go through this. So the first point of advice is keep notes. I had to do this as part of the process, but as you do this, you want to keep notes on the process. So there's a snapshot of my OneNote notebook here. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just whatever works for you. I will tell you before you get started, make a backup of your database, of your SQL database before you get started. That's really important. Secondly, you're going to start with a master script. The master script that they provide you does build all of the SQL foundation that you need. It builds the fact tables, it builds the dimensions, it builds the ETL helpers, it does all of that for you. If you want to make a developer cringe, open the master install file, highlight the whole thing, and hit F5. We will cry. Don't do that. So my recommendation is when you get that master install file, it's commented very well. Each section is commented. You'll see go statements. Highlight a section, run it. Watch your, if you're using SQL Server Manager Studio, watch the messages area. Copy and record to your notebook any messages you get, because that's going to help you troubleshoot. So that's a really, really important part of it. And you're going to have some hot fixes to install first. So run through those hot fixes and make sure that you have those hot fixes installed before you go further. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues and have to backtrack. That's an important lesson I learned the hard way. We won't go into detail on that. So one thing that will help you understand this process, after you get all of your SQL layer built, now we've got to populate those fact tables with our NSC data. In order to do that, you really want to understand the NSC data and how it works. So if you're not familiar with the student tracker format and the data, I'd encourage you to go out to the student tracker site, download the manuals, they have several, and just kind of go through them and get a feel for what everything does. You essentially have 3 query option types, and you'll see as you work through the model why this becomes really important. As I mentioned that one fact table thing earlier, this is important to resolving that issue. So you have your subsequent enrollment, and I won't go through the definitions of these, your prior attendance and your declined admissions. Those are your 3 areas. And you'll see that the extension model is built out to support those 3 different areas, because that's going to help you later in your reporting to monitor the activity of the students, to know if they transferred in or transferred out. So one of the things that was most helpful to me, and probably the biggest challenge to me, is not the technical side. They make the technical side of implementation really easy. It's the figuring out how you're going to manage this data and utilize this data. So I would recommend setting yourself up a process for doing this. Establish a process for how you're going to manage this data. Because Blackboard and NSC are not affiliated, this is still a manual process in terms of submitting and getting your data back. So once you submit, so the NSC extension, you'll see here I've got helpers listed on the site. So you're going to have helpers inside of your data warehouse that helps you generate the submission file you need to NSC to get your transfer data about those students. So to begin with, your very first step in the process is we need to backfill those tables. We need to get transfer data on all of our students going backwards, right? So that's what the initial extract helper does. The only gotcha I ran into there is the way that it's set up is it produces it generates all of your student data under one subsequent query. What I found was easier for me is I changed this query type and produced it for each query type and submitted a generation report for each query type. That way I got back a separate report for each of the query types. Because what you're going to find is now you have 3 response tables. These are your source tables of data where you start. You're going to manually import the data, the transfer data, into these response tables. So you're going to have 3. You're going to have 3 that relate directly to those query options. So I got 3 reports back. Those allowed me to backfill those 3 tables with all of the data going backwards from the point that I submitted that file to NSC backwards for all of my students going as far as I had student data, right? Now that that is populated, you're ready to go. But you have to have a plan for how you're going to continue to update your transfer data going forward. Because this is a manual process, this is something you have to build. It's not something that Blackboard can build for you within the extension itself. So you're going to use these individual helpers to generate going forward. So make yourself a cycle. I'll do it at I've got a note here, I'll do it at the end of every full semester. I'll go through and run these 3. Running these 3 helpers will give me the data on new applicants and new students since the point that I backfilled that table. So by doing that every semester, I'll generate that report, submit it to them, get it back, and now I'm going to append that returned report to my 3 response tables. And so they have instructions in the manual how to do that. It's a straightforward process. We click report, import on the table that we need to put the data in. We say append the data, and we keep going forward. So that process is probably one of the hardest. Map yourself out how you're going to manage it. That's probably the hardest aspect of it. Next is once you have your data populated, you have your SQL layer built, you're going to do the majority of the implementation work in the SAS database. The majority of it is done there. So you're going to spend a lot of time in SQL Server data tools. So again, back up your SAS database. Maybe 2. I'm paranoid. Here's another little tip that I found really, really useful. This is just a good practice tip, whether you do an NSC extension or not. Make a policy for the use of your solution file for your SAS database. When I first started at the institution, we had a consultant that was working in the SAS database. We had a programmer in IT who didn't like the IR position then, who worked in the SAS database. So we had 3 people, and what I found out is they were constantly fighting each other. They all had their own private solution file saved on their computer. They would overwrite each other's work and get mad, and all heck would break loose, and everybody would say, well, it's your fault that data warehouse doesn't work, it's your fault. So I came along and said, oh, this is the problem, we're not doing this anymore. So I wrote a 1-page instructional guide, put it out on the network, and said no one is allowed to keep a solution file on their computer. Here's what we're going to do. Here are the instructions. You, every time, are going to import the SAS database into a new solution file. You're going to do your work, process everything, You're going to save that solution folder to the network drive with a date on it. You're going to put a date in it. No one's going to use it again. They're going to create a new one. They're going to replace the last dated one with their new dated one, and we're going to keep going forward that way. That has reduced a lot of headaches. In this work, you're going to want to do that because you're not going to be able to install all of the NSC implementation in one sitting. You're going to work on this probably several iterations before you get all of the SAS work done. The SAS work does take some time to do. So this is why document your work as you're doing it. Do it in sections. I will tell you one thing. The manual says, here, do all of the SAS work and then process. For me, that would have been very hard. So I broke it into sections. Because what happens is if you process all of that at once, then you have a weave of knots to untangle if something won't process. And so now you're working backwards trying to figure out where did you blow it up. And that's too much headache. So do it in sections. And I actually used the manual in PDF and commented directly on the manual where I was and where I had problems. And so the technical engineers at Blackboard have been my best friends. They got lots of emails about, why doesn't this work? What is this? Why do I need to do this? So they were able to use that feedback to improve the install manual you'll now get and provide clarification where I couldn't figure it out. So you have a really nice install manual to work from. The other thing you want to use is they provide a data dictionary. The data dictionary gives you a good explanation of what everything is. Use that to your benefit as you're working through the install guide so you get a good idea of what you're installing. I ran into only a couple of gotchas, not real big issues, but enough to be aware of. One is just calculation names. So you have a series of calculations you copy and paste in. Our calculation names were different. Those calculations are often pointing to other calculations. So things like theirs was named AVG, GPA, CUM. Ours is named AVG, GPA, cumulative. So you go to run it and it's the measurement blank. Well, it's because it was named differently. So I just had to run through those and check all of those and adjust those for us where we've made changes. The other one is the hierarchy attributes. I found that just based on my user base, some of the default attributes that they have you put into the hierarchy didn't work for my users. I leaned a little more towards the descriptions rather than the codes because a lot of our users just aren't familiar with things like that. So that's a personal preference. What I did is do all the work first. Go through the whole manual first, process everything in pieces, start with data source views, process that, hold your breath, and when you get success, then you can move on. So after you do all of that work, you've noted everything, then go back and start making your changes. Review the calculations, copy and paste them to your notebook, and go through them one by one. I know it's time consuming, but it'll be worth it in the long run. And then same thing with hierarchies. In the back is an appendix that has every hierarchy listed and every source value you're using in that hierarchy. Copy and paste that and document where you changed it as you work through those for your users. I'll continue to refine those as we go and I watch how we've got an advanced pyramid users group. As I watch how they work with it, I'll continue to refine those hierarchies. That's just part of the process. One of the things I like about it is there's a lot of vendors that wouldn't let you change that stuff. I have the ability to go in and say, I don't want the code key to be what they click on. I want it to be the unique description. So check those. The other big gotcha that was like, oh, oops. So what I did is I had my users send me, what kind of reports would you like to see about transfer data? I got about 10 consistent answers. I took those 10 and after I implemented everything, started trying to build those reports in Pyramid. So I went to my personal folder, imported the generic reports they give you, and started building those. And that was where I started to find where the gotchas were. So when you install all of this, The fact tables for student term and applications is the out-of-the-box source fields. That's what you're going to get. Well, we've done a boatload of customization to fact student terms. So just as an example, one of the reports they wanted is we want to see all transfer out students by their developmental placement at the college. Well, developmental placement status key is a customization I built on fact student term that uses our series of logic scores and GPA, high school, and all that to say they were placed only in math, they were placed in reading, they were placed in both, or they were college ready, or we don't know, we don't have enough scores and placement information to determine, unknown. So they wanted to see that by transfer out. Oh, I can't do that because that column's not on in a C fact student term. So you will have to go back and build that customization out. That's pretty easy because it's a matter of going into the source, pointing at your other fact student term source column, and then you can connect the dimension and SQL Server data tools. So that's some of the kind of gotcha work that you'll discover. Other than that, we have a fully functioning transfer model up and running. This is our Business Intelligence Center at ICC. So what we've done is we have a SharePoint site that's on an intranet in the college, and it's connected with our Active Directory, our USR domain for faculty. So, or for personnel really, all personnel can access this site. And we have a series of topic-based dashboards from Pyramid integrated into it. And one of those is the transfer model. We also, as I mentioned, have a group of Pyramid advanced users. And so now one of the biggest things is after you have everything built out is, as we heard earlier, context. If they don't know how to use the data or don't understand the data, it doesn't matter how much data you give them, you won't get anywhere. So definitions, building out those definitions and that terminology so they understand what they're using is really important. So this is just a quick sample of perspective definitions. For our Pyramid users that are accessing and creating reports, the first question was, okay, you gave me transfer data, what perspective do I use? There's 4 of them. So there's a lot that goes around planning the training. And I'll just flip through these. This is transfer dashboard. You'll hear a lot about transfer indicator, really important to how they utilize the data. Few examples of graphs of various transfer work being done. The drill downs are going to be really useful. Some more work I'm going to do on it, and I will end there. I probably could have used the whole hour. I really enjoy talking about this. You couldn't tell. Thank you.